This is Mark Pillar. Let's go ahead and get started with our webinar. Today we are talking about .NET integration with Backendless. This is going to be a fairly technical webinar. I don't have any PowerPoints, any slides. We'll just dig right into the code, for the reason that there is a lot to talk about. And to be honest, .NET is one of my most favorite environments. For the reason that it's so versatile and can do so much that, well, it's kind of hard to compare with others these days, because you can do just as much perhaps with JavaScript or Java or an Android. But anyway, .NET, just from the elegance of it, I think it is one of my favorite ones. So when it comes to .NET integration with Backendless, it could mean a lot of things, because .NET these days is used in a variety of different platforms and client-side environments. So these days, we have in that family .NET Core, .NET Standard, we have Xamarin Forms, we have Unity3D. And the cool thing about the way we integrate with .NET is the SDK that we have for .NET is fairly universal and can be used, as you will see in the demos that I have prepared today. It can be used in all of these environments. So once you mastered the APIs available in Backendless, in our .NET SDK for Backendless, these APIs can be used to integrate your client-side application with Backendless, regardless whether it is a .NET Standard or Xamarin Forms or Unity3D. So, which is fantastic, because the knowledge that you have and you gain from how to integrate with Backendless can be applied in multiple different client-side environments. So if you're not familiar with Backendless and you're just here to learn about the platform, we are a backend as a service. We provide the server-side functionality and all the infrastructure with our product that gives you an ability to create applications without thinking or worrying about the server side. So most of the functions and the features that you would expect to be on the server, such as database, the entire persistence mechanism, user management, ability to log in, register users, handle password recoveries, sending out email, sending out push notifications, handling file storage, all of it is available in Backendless through our APIs. And there is also another sort of a side product that we have is Backendless Console, which is what you see on the screen. You can register and create your own account at develop.backendless.com. You'll create an application. In this case, my app is called My Demo App. And the console gives you the front end for your backend. So in here, you'll be able to see your database. You'll be able to see your geolocation storage. You can create your cloud code and have your own API services running on our servers, and you can tap into those API services and invoke them from your .NET application, no matter what form it is in. So here I will start with something more basic, such as setting up your development environment, which is very straightforward with .NET. And then we will dig into more complex scenarios, such as structuring your Xamarin Forms application. I will show you how integration with Unity3D works. And then we'll open the floor for any questions. We will use the chat section of Zoom webinars. You will see in the Zoom menu there is an option for chat. So if you have any questions as I go, feel free to post your questions. I'll be periodically checking if there are any open questions that I can answer right at that moment, or if not, we will address them towards the end of this webinar. The webinar is recorded, as I mentioned earlier, so we will be posting a link to this recording to our YouTube channel. So to start, I'm going to pull here my writer, which is an IDE for .NET. And since I'm on Mac, I'll be using Visual Studio for Mac and also IntelliJ Writer. So here I have an empty solution. I'm going to create a new project, and let's just call it Demo 1. And then this will be just really an example of how to bring Backendless SDK into your project. And we will just do some very, very basic things to give you an idea, sort of a flavor of how easy it is actually to set up your environment, how to bootstrap your .NET project with Backendless. So for this, I'm going to use a console application because it is the most basic. We can see the output right away. But at the same time, anything more complex than the console application. So whenever you start building mobile apps or Unity3D and so on, everything that you will see here would still be applicable. So let me create this console application, and let me click Create. I think some things are happening. There you go. So in here now we have this application to bring Backendless SDK into your application. What needs to happen is we need to get a Nugget package. So Backendless is available in Nugget, and once you search for Backendless in Nugget, you will see there is a Backendless.NET listing. And by adding it, it automatically brings all the dependencies that exist in Backendless into your project. So if you're familiar with Nugget, that's going to be fairly self-explanatory. As far as the actual dependencies, the SDK that we have, it is open source. It is available in GitHub. So if you go to github.com/backendless, you will see a link to .NET SDK. The only dependency that we have is to Socket.io. And the reason we have this dependency is to enable real-time database integration. We use WebSockets for this. So if you're not using it, it's not really, well, it's going to be pulled in, but it's not going to be used in the compiled linked project because it's going to pull in only whatever functionality that you're using. So now that we have Backendless here, and as you can see, these are all the references that were pulled in. Let's create, well, first, the very first thing that we will need to do is to initialize Backendless sort of space, so to speak, within your application. To do this, you will use the following method, which is Init App. And the Init App requires two parameters. So the first one is going to be application ID, and the second one is the API key. So at the time when you do this, you will already need to create your backend in Backendless Cloud. And for this, just log in to develop.backendless.com, create your application, and you will see something similar. You will see exactly the same thing, but the application ID is going to be different. So what you will need to do is take this application ID. You can just copy it into clipboard, and then you will paste it into the Init App method. And the second argument is going to be API keys. For this, there is a .NET API key, and you can copy it and just paste it in here. So that's all it takes to initialize Backendless in your app. And at this point, you can start making all the API calls available within the SDK. You might, if you're not familiar with all the API keys and just the structure of how Backendless works, you may want to, you may wonder why there are so many different API keys. The answer for this is that for every single API key, such as Android, iOS, of course, .NET, there is a security role associated with that API key. So whenever you make an invocation using an API key, Backendless will assign a role associated with that particular client-side environment. And then using Backendless security, you can restrict on what your Android apps can do versus the .NET apps and so on. Additionally, this information is used for analytics. So you can go to analytics of your Backendless app and see how many requests, how many API calls were made by Android version of your app versus .NET versus iOS and so on. So that's kind of the meaning of the API keys. So now that we have initialized it, let's make a very, very basic call. And in here, in my data section, which is the database, I have already created a couple of tables. So one of them, let's say, is person. And there are two records in this person table. So let's write the code that will actually fetch data from the person table and display it right there in our .NET application. So what I will do is I will create a method, and let's say it's going to be private async void get people, because the table is called person. So in here, we will use the API that looks like this. So backendless.data.auth. So take a look at this, and you will see that just from the structure of the API, you will see that we're going into data, which means that anything that happens after data is going to be an operation on our database. So the table that is called person, and I will reference that table name right here, person. And in here, these are all the operations that you can do on that specific table person. And you will see that you can create new objects, remove, update, find first, find last, a bunch of different things. So what we want to do is we just do find async, which will bring all the records from that table, subject to paging restrictions in Backendless. We'll talk about it in a second. So let's just say that the result is going to be stored in a variable called people, and we support a asynchronous behavior. So this is the method that can be used within a wait keyword. So the method is executed asynchronously, but we're going to do a wait to wait for the result. So now that we have result from this table in the variable called people, which contains all the records from that table. So let's just print out whatever we get here in our console application. So it's going to be person. And let's just say system.write so something like this. So it's going to be name and person name and age person age. So very, very simple code that does the following things. So retrieves records from the person table and then just displays whatever we find in this format in the output window. So let's just run it and see what happens. Oh, actually, before we do this, since this is asynchronous, let's add something like the system. Actually, yeah, console read line. And we also need to do the actual invocation of the getPeople method. So new program, getPeople. All right, so I think this is complete. Let's compile and run it and see the result. All right, there you go. So as you can see that we got those two objects and it displayed Jane, age 33, and Joe, age 30, exactly the data that we have in our Backendless database, okay? So as basic as it is already fairly powerful because we already learned how to connect to the database and retrieve data. Creating new object would be just as simple. So for instance, if we want to put new data, new object into the person table, for this, what you can do is you will create a new object, and it could be dictionary of string object, and let's call it new person. And that new person will have name, let's call him Jack, and the age is going to be 25. All right, so this is our object. And using exactly the same construct, backendless.data.auth, you identify the table where it's going to go. You will have method create. Actually, I think it's going to be a method called save. And that method will take our new person. In fact, let's use the async version, and here just do await. So now this code, not only it will fetch all the data, but it will actually create a new object in that table. So let's run it again. So now we fetched, and if we go back to our database, you can see that there is a new record created, Jack, age 25, which was created by these lines of code. Something to point out, there are two different ways to interact with your objects stored in the database. The approach that I have described here is the dictionary-based approach, where you define, you express data stored in a database through dictionaries, a generic where we may map string, which is the name of the property, to an object, which is the actual value contained in that property. However, Backendless also supports strongly typed objects. So you could create a class called person with the properties of that class mapped to the column names of your table and work with instances of this class. And it's going to work exactly the same way. If we have any time left by the time we're done, and if anyone is interested, please let me know. We will revisit this and I will show you exactly how this works. Also, so for now, I'm going to comment this out because we don't want to keep creating the same object. I would like to demonstrate the real-time aspect of Backendless database. So with real-time, the way it works is anytime new object is created in a table or an existing object is modified, or if an object is deleted, you can actually subscribe to receive events delivered in real time to your application whenever any of those events occur, such as objects are created, updated, or deleted. And the API to make this happen looks like this. So we will be using the same person table. And notice that once we get this of person, one of the methods is called RT, which stands for real time. And then in here for this RT, you can add a bunch of different listeners. So there is a listener for creation, there is a listener for deletion, for update. So let's add a create listener. The create listener works in the way where you can basically provide a callback that will be executed anytime a new object is created. And that callback, which is the very first suggestion here, will deliver basically all objects without any kind of differentiation into your callback. The second one, where we have that where clause right here, it works in a way where you can express special condition that you're interested in that the new object must match before it is delivered to you. So let's just say that we have new object delivered to this callback. And in here, let's just print out this object and just say new object created. And we can also display the name of that object. Let me use this. So name is going to be new object name, and the age of it is going to be new object age. So that's all it takes to add a callback for real time. So now let's run this again, and then we will be creating a new object and then monitoring how this code responds to the event of new object being created in that specific table. So now we got some log basically saying that the subscription has been established to receive real-time events. And in here in my console, let me just move it up a little bit so we can see the output of the console. So let's just create a new object, and let's say the age is going to be 44 and the name is going to be Anne. Click Save, and as you can see, this callback has been executed immediately as soon as I pressed Enter. When I created a new object in a database, we got a callback in our application notifying us that a specific user has been created. So the way this works now is that anytime a new object is created by any of your client applications in that specific table, a callback will be executed. Okay, you can actually limit it and create a condition to receive notification only when certain types of objects are created. And here's how that works. So in here, the first argument, there is a separate signature for add create listener. The first argument could actually be your condition. So for example, let's say that we're interested in receiving notifications only where age is greater than 30. Okay, and this condition is called where clause, as you can see by this the method argument here. And then what where clause is, or what the name of it comes from, it really is a part of the SQL statement that goes after the where keyword. Thus, it becomes a where clause. So the syntax that we support is pretty much everything that is supported in SQL, where you can basically express the condition using the SQL syntax for the objects that must match this condition when this callback is executed. And this could get as complex as you can imagine. So you can basically say, well, the name starts with a certain letter or word, and age is in a certain range, and the creation date is in a certain time period. So you can basically get completely wild with this. But we'll keep it simple for the sake of this demo. So let me run it again, and then I will create a couple of users in a couple of objects in the table, and you will see that this condition is executed only for some of them, specifically the ones where age is greater than 30. So here I'll switch to console, and let's just create a new person and put the age as 25, so the event should not be invoked. And let's say it's going to be Charlie. So Charlie is now in the database, and there is no callback because Charlie's age is 25, while the code said notify me when anytime the age is greater than 30. So now let's create someone who is 32, and the name is going to be David. So save. And as you can see, the notification came in for David because the David's record in the database matches this condition: age is greater than 30. So this is how it works with real time. Very similarly, in fact, identically, you can create listeners for the update and delete requests. It's going to be exactly the same signature. Whenever an object is updated, you will get the actual object that had been updated. Or if it is deleted, you will receive, I believe you actually receive the actual object. So you will know what has been deleted. So this is real time. And real time works exactly the same way in all forms of client-side applications that we support. So you can use it in your Xamarin Forms apps, you can use it in Unity3D, and so on. Okay, so that's setting up and start using this APIs. Okay, if you have any questions, please use the chat pod. I'll be answering them as we go. What other things can you do with backendless APIs? Well, let's start with user service. So registering users is as basic as using backendless user service. And as you can see here, the methods to log in, log out, update user, register user, and so on. So in this case, anything that you do here, you'll be working with the users table in backendless. So they're if you go to the database, let me make it a little bit larger again. So in the users table, this is where your users will be stored. And for your users, you can configure user properties and then really define what the user structure should look like. In most cases, if you have a registration form in your app, anything that you ask your users to fill out, you can configure the properties for a user object exactly the same way, and there's going to be a one-to-one mapping. Whenever you have a registered user, if you use the login API, then that's going to look like this. You basically use login, and then in here you will provide the identity, which is the login, and the password. Okay. There is a question if this is going to be up. Is this uploaded after session? Yes, the webinar is recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. So for anyone who is registered, we will follow up with a link to that video once it is uploaded. Okay. All right, so that's kind of the basic API usage. All the APIs are documented. If you go to the documentation, you can read about all of them. But as far as how to get to the documentation, of course, you can do it from our website. Also, in Backendless Console, there is a new feature that is available as of today. If you click on this navigator and just type in API documentation, you can get a link to any of this. So here's the documentation for .NET. Select this, and it opens up documentation for .NET, where all the APIs are going to be described right here. All right, so that's how you get to it. So to get to the navigator, once again, click on this icon right here, and you can ask any question you want, or just for docs, type in API documentation. Okay, now let me switch to something more complex. And for this, I have a project in here that is going to be in Visual Studio. Let me actually start Visual Studio. It's starting up. All right, so we have, hold on. I accidentally clicked the button to update, and I want to cancel this because we don't want to run those updates right now. All right, so in my Visual Studio, here it is. Let me show you a Xamarin shared application first. So with the shared application, it is a common code base, and then you can build an Android and iOS versions of the shared application. This way, the code base is shared, as the name suggests, but you also have to build for Android and for iOS. So from the structure perspective, take a look at this. And if you use Visual Studio, you will recognize very quickly. So we have the application is called Tasky. I believe it was adapted from some application somewhere in open source. So we have this Tasky shared that contains all the logic that is shared between Android and iOS. And then for any OS-specific behavior, you can create the Droid and the iOS versions. So in here, the actual logic of the UI is completely abstracted and separated from the logic of how you work with the backend. And then the backend itself is handled in the shared version. So we have the task database that contains all the logic of dealing with the backend storage, and it encapsulates it quite nicely. So in here we have methods such as get to do items, or get a specific item, or save one, or delete one. Essentially the basic CRUD: create, retrieve, update, delete. And in the implementation of it, we use backendless APIs to get all the data. So here it is in get items. We just run this API to get everything. Getting a specific item, there is a method find by ID. Saving an individual item, and so on. In here, instead of the dictionary-based approach, we use the strongly typed one, and the actual implementation uses generics, so you can actually use it for different types of classes, not necessarily the task class. Let me run one of these, and let's start with the iOS, and so you can see exactly how it works. So here's my emulator. All right, so it started up. There are no tasks, and let's create one. And let's just say shopping is going to be our first task. Save, and now we have shopping. Let's add another one that is going to be workout. So now we have two. If you select one and you say that it is done and save, it updates it in the database and reflects it in the UI. The actual database for this application is, let me make sure that I have the right app ID in here. In fact, let me switch to the console. All right, so here's the task table that was created by the application, and all the data is stored in here. As you can see, there is a name column and there is a date done column, which is Boolean, and they just reflect the state of the application. So in fact, if I go and I modify shopping is done, it will be updated immediately in console. So shopping is now done, save, and it is now set to true. So you can see the state changes of your application directly in the database. If I run exactly the same application in Android, it will work exactly the same way, but it's going to be for Android, and that's really the beauty of Xamarin in this case, where you can have common shared logic of working with your persistent storage, in this case backendless, and all the UI related things are going to be handled separately in the manner that is specific to Android or iOS. This project is available in our GitHub repository. In fact, if you go to github.com/backendless, you'll find the .NET project in there, .NET repository, and then in the samples you will see the Tasky, and you'll be able to just modify, you will need to put in your application ID and your API key in here, and you'll be able to work with it exactly the same way as I just did. I'm just trying to find where we put the API keys. They're going to be somewhere here. I'm just maybe perhaps in the managers. Yeah, there you go. So you will, under managers, you will see the Backendless Init class, and in here, this is where application ID and the API key go. If you run it without, you'll just get a nice error message saying that the application ID is missing. Anyway, so that was the task key. Another project that I wanted to demonstrate to you is the Xamarin Forms one. And this one is called Acquaint. You might be familiar with it. I believe it's a fairly popular application that has many different implementations. This one is more complex, just because I believe Xamarin Forms are somewhat more complex, but it's way more powerful. And then in this case, there is a common solution, common project that includes all the common code. And then there is a code for using .NET Standard for Android and for iOS. Let me run it first, just so you can see how it works, and then I will show you specifically how it is implemented from the integration perspective. So let me switch to iOS, because that, I believe, runs a little bit faster. All right, the application runs. It may take a while the first time because the logic in the app is to check whether the database exists with all the data. If not, it populates it with sample data. Now all of this is done. We can take a look at the table in the application. So here it is. The table is called Acquaintance, and all the data, the sample data, is now in the database. And the application bootstraps the setup and creates all of this for you, just so you can experience the app. Now back to the application, you get a list of the users. This is really your contact book or contact list application for every user here. You can click and get the details, all the properties for that user. They come back from the database. There is integration with Map, where it places the location of that user. If you run it on the device, you should be able to click the button to make the phone call, which is something not supported in the emulator. Click this icon and send that an email. You can modify this user, click edit, and edit all the properties. So it's a very, delete the user, very rich application that gives you a demonstration of multitude of various things that you can do in an app, and specifically demonstrates how to use the APIs, Backendless APIs, to persist all the data, to run the queries, to modify existing objects, and so on. The UI on Android looks very similar, more of an Android flavor, just because it really compiles as a native app. So a very, very cool project just to dig through and see how it works, to understand how an application like this can be structured. I'm not going to run the Android version. You can do it yourself. If you decide to do it, just select the target, which is going to be Android, run it, and you'll be able to experience the same thing. A couple of things to note about the implementation. You will see that it consists, let me just collapse all of these. There is a common group that contains all the common code, and there are sub-projects for Android and iOS, and there is a base project which is .NET Standard. So these two projects, the Android and iOS, depend on .NET Standard. However, when it comes to the integration with Backendless, the way this project is architected is all of the data integration with the actual database, with the persistent system, is localized in this acquaint.data.net standard. There is a class called Backendless Data Source, and all the logic, all the APIs that the application depends on are in here. And you can see this is really tiny for all the persistence that the database, that the application does. That's all the code that is required to handle the actual integration with the database. And I think partially this is due to the fact that Backendless APIs are very compact. So that's something that you should check out just to see how things work. The majority of the project is going to be more on just handling all the UI issues and styling and rendering all the details of these apps right on the screen. But this is really just the only class that deals with the persistence. So very cool project. You can find the sources for this in GitHub. If you go to github.com/backendless, find the .NET SDK repository, and in there you'll be able to see and download the sample. Just fork it, and you can play with it as well. Make sure to modify the app ID and API key, just like with taskkey, which is what I showed earlier. So if you go to the class that is called settings.cs, it is in the acquaint.util, you will need to put in your application ID and your API key in these two properties, and that's it. That really bootstraps the whole thing. So very, very easy to get started to experience this. Another thing that I wanted to demonstrate to you today is the integration with Unity3D. And with Unity, the way it works, let me move this out of the way and bring Unity in here. So with Unity, I'm going to create a new project. So this is latest version of Unity. So let's just call it webinar demo. All right, so here's the Unity here. And in order to bring Backendless into this project, it is done through these assets. And then you do import package, custom package. Whenever you click on this, you'll be prompted to select your package file. And I already have downloaded this package, which is for the file that is located right here. If you were to do it from scratch, what you will need to do is you'll go to our GitHub repository, locate .NET SDK right here. And then under .NET SDK, if you go to, I believe it is projects, and then select Unity SDK, you'll actually get a page with a nice set of instructions that will walk you through everything that I'm going to show you right now. But the very first thing that you will need to do is if you go to Unity package directory, you have these two Unity packages. Well, this is the latest one. So you will download this file, and that is the file that you will need to select in your Unity. So this is exactly the file that I downloaded. So if you click on this, it will import that package into Unity. And at this point, Backendless is configured. In fact, what you will get is this kind of pop-up that allows you to select everything that you need to import, and you will need to select everything. Well, everything is selected by default. So click import, and that selects and installs Backendless SDK into your Unity3D project. And at this point, you can start using Backendless APIs in your application. Okay, there is actually a demo that is included among the assets, and in this case, it is this test data service. So to see it in action without writing any code, what you can do is you drag this scene into your project, and then in here for this scene, if you select Backendless plugin, then you'll get this plugin configuration. And in here, you can specify your application ID and API key. It supports dev and prod environments, and that works in a way that you could have two applications, one that you use in Backendless for development, and another one that you use for production. So this way you can configure both of these. As you can see, there is development app ID and production app ID. If you have only one, no problem. Just select, let's say, dev, and configure your development app ID and API key. So for this, I will just go back to my application and select the application ID and paste it in here. And then I will also select .NET API key and paste it right here. Okay. At this point, the configuration of your plugin is done. Okay. And then what you can do is you can just run that scene. And once it runs in console, you will see the result of running it in Unity. So in this case, it actually should have created a table. It's interesting because when Unity runs, it was able to create this test table on the fly, but with the other demo, when I was using Xamarin Forms, it failed to do so. So there's something interesting going on. But anyway, this object that you see right here in this test table was created by Unity right here. And in fact, that demo in Unity is automatically configured for real-time data. So in this case, if I modify this object and save it, then I believe you should, or let's say if we create new object, there you go. So it receives real-time events for new objects created. So Unity is has real-time integrated into it out of the box. For as far as using the APIs, it's exactly the same .NET APIs that I have demonstrated earlier to you, and the API docs are available for .NET. So pretty much everything that .NET supports can be done in Unity as well. There might be a question as far as things that are like specific to operating systems, such as push notifications. The push notification support is built into .NET SDK. It is built and available for Unity, so you can receive native push notifications if you build, let's say, games for mobile devices on Unity. You can take advantage of the Backendless push notifications. You will need to do the setup in Backendless, follow the docs to configure your FCM server registration and registering it with Backendless, and configure your iOS certificates and also registering with Backendless. All of this is available in the documentation. So that's certainly something that is something that we make sure that it's available in the uniform fashion. Okay. Let's see, was there something else that I wanted to demonstrate? I think that's pretty much it. It's kind of a shame that I couldn't complete my demo for Xamarin Forms. I'm sure we'll figure it out quickly, and that we'll get this working. But at this point, that's all I have prepared for you. So if you guys have any questions or would like to see something that you expected to see and I didn't show, please let me know. So let's just switch to the Q&A now, and we have a little bit of time left. And just let me know if you have any questions or if there's something else that you wanted to see. All right. So there is more comment that wanted to see more user management stuff for .NET, like login, registration, and so on. Well, since we have time, let's actually do that right now, and we'll start coding. So let's create a method that registers a new user. So we'll use exactly the same approach, just creating an async function, and we'll just say register new user, and that's going to be our demo method. So in here, let's take a look at the API that registers a user. So let's say backendless.user_service.register async, and you will see that the register method, the argument for this is a instance of class called backendless user, and backendless user is provided to you by the SDK. So let's just say the variable is going to be called new user. We don't want to do that. Let's just create this variable first, new user, and that's going to be instance of this. We'll fill in the blanks in a second, and that's going to be the argument that we pass new user. Okay. Now, new user has the following built-in properties. There is email and password and object ID. So these are built in because every user will have, well, certainly password, not necessarily email, but most of the users or most of the apps use email as a way to register users, and that's why we put email in there. If your users have other properties such as phone number or gender or birth date or whatever, then you can use this add property method to configure those properties. For the time being, let's use email, and let's just say it's going to be joe@backendless.com. And the password for that user will be, let's just say, word password. Not very secure, but good enough for the demo. So this is all it takes to register a new user in your application. Let me switch back to Backendless console. I think that I used this particular app. Let me get rid of these tables so we get rid of the banner. So now if I go back to users, there is one user that I already had there before, but after I run this code, and in here, rather than calling get people, we will call new program dot register new user. Okay, and let's just run it. So now it ran. We probably should have put some console message. And in here, now we see that there is a user, joe@backendless.com. Okay. Right. We also have property age, which was not specified. If you were to provide a value for a property that is not built in, then as I said, you can use the add property method. And that one takes the name of the property and a value. So let's say that's going to be 33. So if I rerun this particular method, then a user is going to be registered. Take a look at the email, and the email has this kind of blue background, and this is for the reason that the email address is used as identity. You see there is actually a tooltip that says that email is the identity column. If you switch to schema, you will see that the email is indeed marked as identity, and it has these constraints: not null, unique, and indexed. And these are set up by default for any column that is marked as identity. You can switch to a different column and set it up as identity. So the reason I'm telling you this is because if I were to rerun the same method, I would actually get an error saying that that user already exists. In fact, let me do that right now so we can see that exception coming from the server. All right, so as you can see that there is an error from the server that that user already exists. So if I modify the email somewhat and just technically register a different user, then that registration will go through. All right, so let's go back to data browser and see we have joe1@backendless.com, age 33. So that user has been registered. What are some additional things that you can do as far as user registration that Backendless provides? Well, for one, you can configure so that users have to confirm their email address before they can start logging into your application. In order to set this up, if you go to users and select user registration, then you'll see this toggle that is going to be disabled by default. But if we enable this, then users will be required to click on a link that goes out to their email address. And by clicking that link, they essentially confirm that their email address is valid. What does that email look like? You can set it up and have a completely custom text of your email if you go to users and then email templates. There's going to be multiple templates. The one that you are interested in this use case is called confirmation template. So in here, you can customize the look and feel and the body of the email. This is going to be the placeholder for the actual link that they will need to click. And that's how you set up a confirmation template for your users. So to put it into perspective, let's register another user and change it to Joe2. And if I run it, all right, so now the user is there. It's Joe2, but take a look, there is a property that's called user status. And then in here, it says email confirmation pending. That means that an email has gone out to that user, and Backendless is waiting for them to click that link to confirm their email address. Once confirmed, then this will change to enabled. Or you, as an application owner, you can just change to enabled without waiting for that user to click on that link in the email. Or if you want to disable someone, just click disabled. And once they are disabled, they will not be able to log in to your application. Okay. So speaking of login, that is also fairly straightforward process. Let me demonstrate how that works. Although login is not very visual, all it does is just logs in and establishes identity. So from the API perspective, it's going to look like this. Login. And login takes two arguments, which is the login, which is the identity, and password. So in this case, if we have joe2@backendless.com and the password is password, the return value from the login is Backendless user. You can see it right here. So that object that you get from login, so let's just say Backendless user, and the variable name is going to be logged in user. login async. So once we get to this line 31 of code, logged in user represents the user that is logged in. There is a little bit of a magic that's going to happen thereafter. So if I have an existing logged in user, so anytime I log in a user successfully, then all subsequent invocations of the APIs will automatically carry the identity of that user. That means that if that user has some security role where you either allowed that role to do something or denied, then backendless security will automatically enforce that security restrictions automatically without you doing anything. So for example, let me show you what that really means. Let's say we have a custom user role. So I'm going to go to users and then security roles, and I'm going to create a role that is called, let's say, super user. So now we have the super user. You can customize the permissions for super user. And let's say that this joe2@backendless.com, we assign a role of super user to that user. Okay, so now whenever that user logs in and then starts executing certain or any of the APIs, then whatever restrictions that you have for that custom role will be enforced by Backendless. So for instance, that user goes into the task table and starts retrieving data. And for whatever reason, you decide that the super users should not have the permissions to the task table. So all you do is you select this table, go to permissions, then select roles permission. And then for your super user, just deny access to that. See, the cross between find and super user now has X. So here, if I log in this user, this guy, and I just make the request in my application to retrieve data from the table, I will guarantee to get an exception from the server. In fact, let me demonstrate this to you. So this user is already registered, so we log in, and then we say await backendless.data.off, and the table, I think it was called task. Yeah, task. That's it. So logged in the user. In fact, we don't really need this variable. You can get it if you need to some values out of it, but in this case, we're logging in the user and then we're making the request to get the objects from that table. So let's rerun it, and then we should be getting an exception saying that that user doesn't have that permission. Oh, actually, what's going to happen for the find, I should have thought about it first. What's going to happen is if the user doesn't have a permission to retrieve data, they will basically be getting an empty array, because by telling them that you don't have the permission is going to be sort of misleading, not really misleading, but kind of more obvious for if someone wants to hack your system that they don't have the permission for that user. However, if they, let's say if we want to create a new object, then that will result in an exception. So if we do the save operation here and then pass in an object to create. Let's say so for task, it's going to be, let's say, name. So here, that should result in an exception. There you go. So see, user has no permission to create the entity. So that's the significance of the login, is that any subsequent API invocation carries the identity of that user. So that's the most important thing, and as a takeaway of this, which is exactly what you would expect. Like if a user logs in, then anything else that happens in the application should have the identity of that user. So hopefully that answers your kind of a question, comment about user management stuff. It looks like there are no more questions. I want to thank everyone for joining our webinar. Once it's recorded and posted to YouTube, we'll send out the link. If you would like to reach out to us with any follow-on questions, you can find us at support.backendless.com, which is our support forum, or our Slack channel, which is slack.backendless.com. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you in our next webinar. Bye.